Namaste and welcome to the Divas That Care Network. I'm your host, Gia-Raquel Rose, owner of Airs Above Yoga, and you are listening to Above the Ground podcast. If this is your first time tuning in, our network is going into its 15th year and is listened to in over 30 countries. I would like to personally thank you for giving me the gift of your time. It is truly my honor to hold space with you. And as we are starting to hopefully move into warmer weather, I would like to talk about what we all go through each and every year, a little bit of spring cleaning and trying to create space for new, better things to come to our lives. And so, in order to make room for the new, we have to clear out what no longer serves, what may be stagnant, holding us back, and energetically, for our bodies, our minds, and our spaces, right? Internal and external. So, when it comes to our bodies and to yoga, we're going to talk about twisting. And I know we've touched on it a little bit, especially when we're talking about heart openers and back bending. But this is going to be all about detox, your body, mind, soul, space, living area, yoga studio, if you have one, meditation closet, if you have one. We're going to start to talk about releasing what no longer serves and creating space to bring in things that start to resonate with our higher vibes as we continue to elevate. So, for our bodies, again, and with regard to yoga, one of the best things that we can do is twist. And the reason for that is think about kind of your internal organs and your torso as in essence like a damp towel, right? And when you wring out a damp towel, you are releasing all of those, all of that water, all of that gunk, all of that stuff that's stuck. And when we talk about our bodies, movement is key for detoxification. Our lymphatic system runs on movement. It doesn't have its own pump beyond our heart, right? So it relies on our movement, our physical actions to create stimulation to move our lymphatic fluids through our bodies and helping our liver and our organs to detox and keep us in a stasis, the best possible kind of neutral that we can be in. And of course, everybody's going to go through ebbs and flows. Everyone's going to have their disease processes, etc. But the goal of this is to be able to navigate our stasis, to stay in it or bring yourself back to it as much as you can so that we don't wind up with a disease process because of stagnation, because of stuck energy, because of flow. And so, one of the best ways to do this, again, is through the act of twisting. And as I explained, kind of think of it as wringing your body out. Think of it as releasing all of those things that no longer serve you and literally moving the muscles around the organs, creating that effect of manipulating the organs gently, subtly, consciously, with the ability to thus be able to bring yourself that extra level of detoxification. And this works not only to help with elimination, which we won't get into the nitty gritty of, but think about what that means for you. And you may notice that after a deep yoga practice, you may have stimulated your need for the restroom or the loo, if you will. And a lot of times twists can help with that too. So maybe if you are feeling a little bit stagnant or stuck, maybe a little bit constipated, I know we love that word, but if that's something that you struggle with, twisting can be a really great way for you to start to kind of release some of that stuff and stuck energy within you. So there are a bunch of ways to do it. And what I love about twisting is there are so many different ways to do it that should be accessible for almost every body type. You can twist reclined, you can twist seated, you can twist standing, you can twist on your knees. There are so many different ways to go about it that there are ways to modify for even the most beginner yogi. So, to that end, we're going to talk a little bit about kind of from beginner, intermediate to expert level. And as always, I will be posting some videos as we move along. Keep an eye out for them, and they will be able to give you an idea of what I'm talking about in case, let's say, you don't have that exact mental picture acutely in your mind's eye. So we're going to start with one of my favorites and traditional Shavasana prep, something to do at the end of a yoga practice. And this is your reclined spinal twist. And so One of the most important things, and what I think a lot of yoga teachers will see as they walk around a room and see a bunch of people preparing themselves for Shavasana and coming into this reclined spinal twist, is a lot of times people, especially because there are very infrequently mirrors up on the ceiling of a yoga studio or wherever you may be practicing, there the spine will form a C curve. And what you really want to do is you want the spine to be as straight, quote unquote, and what I mean is as aligned as possible. And a lot of times when people set them up for a reclined spinal twist, they just throw their knees over to one side and then look and turn their gaze or their neck in the opposite direction of your knees, right? What you want to do is you actually want to lift the hips up off the mat and shift the hips away from the direction you intend to look. So when your knees fall to the side, you want to pick up the hips and shift them away from your knees so that you're setting your body up in alignment. So the other thing to think about in reclined spinal twist is actually a little bit more complicated than even some of the more, I'll say, intermediate or expert level, advanced level yoga poses. And the reason for that is because of the lack of awareness with the setup and the intricacy of the setup to make sure that you are in proper alignment to get the full benefit of the pose. So when you think about your reclined spinal twist, if you can visualize with me for a moment, your arms are going to be out in a T. You are preparing yourself in what I would say a bridge or a bridge setup with your knees bent, spine in alignment, shoulders to hips, and heels in line with your hips. When you press up, you're going to be shifting, lifting the hips just ever so slightly to shift them over to one side of your mat. Doesn't matter which, we're going to do both sides. Always twist both sides equally and for the same number of breaths or the same amount of time. And when you lift the hips and you shift them over to the side, let's say to one edge of your mat or towards one edge of your mat, what I like to do is I then like to have people roll over onto the opposite side. Now, there's two-prong approach to this. And the reason for that is because a lot of people who have a little bit of limited mobility in their spine, in their shoulders, even in their neck, won't be able from their side, from like a fetal position, to roll open all the way. And so, because of that, you may need a small pillow, a towel, a blanket under that shoulder to prop so that you don't feel strain through your ribs. Remember, when it comes to twisting, and this is arguably the most important aspect of twisting. I know I mentioned it before. I will always mention it every single time we talk about it. The twist comes from the belly button up. I don't care if it's reclined, kneeling, sitting, standing, upside down. The twist comes from the belly button up. Why is that, you ask? Because our lumbar spine is meant to bend and flex. It is not flex and extend, I should say. It is not meant to twist. Now, does it give a little bit? Of course it does. Same as the thoracic vertebrae that support the rib cage. But the thoracic vertebrae are meant to twist. That rib cage does not extend and flex quite as much as it, just simply because of the mechanical dynamics of the thoracic vertebrae. The rib cage itself prevents a lot of bending and flexing. It's meant to do that. It's protecting your most vital organs, your heart, your lungs. And so you want to keep those very, very safe. That's why it's there. Thank you, whomever you thank. So to that end, thinking about your twist, you really want it to come from the area of the body that it's meant to twist. And those vertebrae in your thoracic are meant to twist and wrap around. That is the most mobility you're going to be able to get from side to side. If your hips and lower back start to support or are weak and can't support, let's say, I shouldn't say can't, but are not set up for success to support in whatever way, then you need to be very mindful of that and not anger, upset, or frustrate your hips and lower back by letting them move with your upper and middle back. So keeping your lower abdominals engaged. So think from the belly button down, supporting the lumbar spine, keeping your core nice and strong, pelvic floor engaged. And then literally you can put your hands at your waist and you're just going to be your own guide. Twist from that waist. Don't let the hips come with you. Sit into the hip that you're twisting away from. Ground into the hip that you're rolling away from. And that's a nice way to start to really deepen the twist in the proper way that it's meant to be for your body mechanics and structure. So now that I said all that, coming back to the visualization of us on our mats, where we've set up in our gentle bridge, we've shifted our hips to one side of the mat, and we've now rolled onto our side and dropped our knees to the opposite, away from where we've just positioned our hips. And the reason for that is we have that gentle towel, that rolled blanket, and then we can gently roll from fetal position into what is ideally, without a mirror, a better setup for no C curve in the spine, but again, I hate the word straight sometimes, but a linear or aligned spine, opening up and allowing that shoulder that you're now rolling again in the same direction that we put the hips to be supported. You might experience some tension, especially if you have tight hip flexors, tight IT bands, tension in and around the hips will pull. And you'll notice that by the top knee coming from the stacked position slightly back. And so in a perfect utopian world, we would have perfectly stacked knees, perfectly aligned spine, and perfectly square hips in your reclined spinal twist. So to that end, you will always then very gently and with support take your gaze away from your knees for both sides. And I'm trying to give cues so that we're not talking about left and right and switching back and forth. We're just talking about setting yourself up in either direction. If, for example, you have any discomfort stacking your knees, or if you have maybe unusually wide hips, I definitely tend to have a little bit wider hips. You can take a pillow again or a rolled up towel or blanket and put it in between the knees, even between the knees and the calves behind the actual knee joint, almost on an angle to offer that extra level of support. There are lots of different ways to prop. So reclined spinal twist is definitely one of the more gentle. It is what arguably the most gentle, but can be very, very jarring for the rib cage and the collarbone and the upper part of the back and neck if not propped or positioned appropriately. So just to get into it, we're going to start from the ground up, but definitely that should be accessible, especially when propped and, paid attention to and entered and exited gently and consciously. It is probably one of, if not the most restorative twist that you can come into. Now, moving up from the ground onto our seated twisting, there are tons of variations in yoga for seated twisting. A couple of the ones that I frequent, I should say, is a sage twist and also a Lord of the Fishes twist. And I have touched on Lord of the Fishes twist when we talked about our heart openers in the past. So I encourage you to go back and have a listen to that. I will be posting a video on that very, very shortly, and you will have an idea of what the Lord of the Fishes twist looks like, because I definitely don't want to take our time to explain that one again. It's a little bit more complicated, but the sage twist is the prep for the Lord of the Lord of the Fishes twist, and is great for creating mobility in the knees, getting that synovial fluid moving through the joints, and basically having a neutral place. It's a great kind of test for yourself to see where your mobility is, not only in your knees, but in your hips. And you're going to sit, and again, as I always say, with any seated posture, your seat is as important as the hip and spine alignment in the reclined spinal twist. And a lot of people have a lot of tension in their hamstrings. They have a lot of tension in their hip flexors, and they may not have the capacity to get their sits bones, air quotes for those of you listening, behind them. And what this does is it sets the spine up for proper alignment. If you are sitting too far back towards your sacrum, behind your sits bones, again with the air quotes, then you are going to naturally round through the lower back, dump weight into the lumbar spine, which we do not want. And it's going to be very uncomfortable to sit. So when you think about, a yogi in meditation and they're in that very tall, upright, seated position, maybe they're sitting on a little bit of a pillow or a bolster. The reason for that is that helps to align the hips slightly higher than the knees, or tilt the pelvis forward, essentially, is what we're trying to do. So when we get the sit bones behind us, the spine is able to align. If you're sitting with your sit bones underneath you, you're going to pull forward. And I'm making hand motions for those of you watching on YouTube. I encourage you to check it out there so you can kind of see my awesome, borderline stick figure explanation of what happens when your hips are tight and you wind up sitting on your sacrum or behind your sits bones, and how that just prevents you from setting yourself up out of the gate. It's the same as the C curve reclined, right? So we really want to try to avoid that. You can prop with a little wedge pad. You can, again, sit on the edge of a towel or blanket. There are lots of ways to mitigate that. But it's imperative to get your sits bones behind you. Once you have that position, then you're going to have your legs out extended. You're going to be very strong and grounded through the extended leg. And then you're going to bring one knee into the body. You're going to have your sole of that foot on the ground. You're going to be grounding strongly through. And what I like to say to people is to stand into that foot and pretend like you're going to stand up and do like a one-legged pike. Don't do that, because unless you're a bodybuilder or a weightlifter, it's going to be very challenging for you and may damage your knee. But just give that little lift to really feel the strength in the leg and the grounding through that grounded foot. From there, you're going to ground again through that extended leg, heel press down, calf press down, lifting that kneecap up, really feeling strong through the quadricep there. And then bringing that foot and that heel of this bent leg as close to your hip as possible. And now we don't want the foot right next to the opposite leg. We want the foot in line with the hip. So there will be a small gap. And the reason for that is because we want everything happy and in alignment, heel, knee, hip. Very important. If you have any knee injuries, I should be mindful that you may not be able to really compress the knee as tightly as we may want it to be compressed. And so I encourage you to always listen to your body. Don't squish your knee. If it doesn't feel comfortable, just take the foot farther away from the body. If it's really far away from the body, or, a gentle bend, you can take your hand behind the thigh. But if you have a lot of mobility in your knee, you're going to take the same arm as the knee that is bent and take the elbow around and hug that knee in. As you do, you're going to lift up as tall as you can, take a deep breath in, and on your exhale, release your shoulders down and really feel the compression between that bent leg and your torso. Once you have that set up, you're going to take another deep inhale. You're going to extend the opposite arm, have that twist come from above the belly button, reach all the way around and hug with the elbow to the opposite knee. On the next inhale, you're going to sweep that same side arm up and over, reaching it back, touching the fingertips to the ground, and then finally taking your gaze over that shoulder as well. So again, belly button up, everything turning around away from the hips. You will notice, more than likely, you start to shift into the hip of the bent leg. Ground yourself back into that opposite hip. Sit deeply into the extended leg. Use that as your balance point. I know that like mirrors are a big, do you or don't you in yoga. When you are learning postures, I am a huge proponent of mirrors. The only time I don't like them is when they take you out of your body and they take you into a competition mindset with other yogis in the room with you. Practice is your own. It doesn't matter what anybody else is doing. And even if it looks pretty, it may not be in alignment, and you might actually be doing better than you think you are. So always keep that in mind. It is never about competition. It is always about your connection to and in your body. That is what yoga is about. It's union between you and you. So from this position, when you're ready to come out of it, you're going to very simply release the fingertips that have been touching the floor, gently come back to center, send that bent knee out, maybe give your legs a little shake if that's comfortable for you, and come to the other side. So that is a very gentle, very accessible, again, with a little bit of mindfulness and modification of the bend of the knee, wherever it's comfortable for you. That's a great seated twist that we can do. Moving up from the floor to our feet or knees. So what I love about so there are two options here. You can either, if balance is an issue for you, come to a revolved low lunge position, or you can come, which is going to be a little bit more challenging, a revolved high lunge or revolved extended angle position. And the reason for this is I'm going to talk a lot about our knees. So we're going to just put a pause and we're going to talk about knee mobility and knee safety in these twists. For both of these twists, the front leg is going to be bent and grounded. That knee is going to be at a 90-degree stacked directly over that ankle. Not a lot of modifications to do there because in either position, it's going to be the same. For both sides, it doesn't matter. Hopefully, you are comfortable there. If you are not comfortable there, we're going to come back down onto the mat and work on the mat. If we are comfortable there, it's going to depend on a couple things as to that back leg, that extended leg. If you're in a low lunge position and you have issue with pressure on the knee or being on your knee for any period of time because of, any kind of issue with the kneecap itself, three things to consider. The first of which, you want to make sure that the kneecap is behind the point of contact. You want to almost be more on the quadricep attachment, which is in front of the knee. If you'll know, and the reason you'll know is if you're on your kneecap, it's going to feel like your knee is pulling apart in two directions. It's going to be wildly uncomfortable. If you are there, you want to lift up by being on the ball of that back leg, bring the knee back a little bit farther than you were, and then come back down until you feel a sense of relief on that kneecap. Another option for you is to take a folded tail. You don't want it to be rolled. You don't want a lot of extra cushion, but you can always take a folded blanket or towel under the knee for a little bit of extra support. That is another option if balance is an issue. If balance is not an issue, then I encourage you, for many reasons, to attempt the high lunge or extended angle. And while these two poses are not necessarily interchangeable, I'm going to get into now what the distinction is and why I encourage a high lunge over an extended angle unless you are on an intermediate to advanced level of yoga. And here's the reason. Extended angle position is generally set up similarly through the legs to a warrior two. Your front foot is in line with your back arch or heel, and it is essentially you facing the widthwise, the long side of your mat. Whereas in revolved, you are in a warrior two position with your legs, where instead of being arch or heel to heel alignment, you are on hip to hip alignment with your feet on train track. So your feet should be in line with your hips. The high lunge position is exactly that. So when we're talking about revolved extended angle, it's I don't want to say improper, but it puts too much pressure on the knee. Is it possible? It's possible. Do yogis practice it this way? They do. Are there certain practices where it is practiced this way? It is. And you can even deepen and go really, really crazy by coming around with your arm across the knee and you're on like one single train track and it can get very, very intense. We're not going to talk about that other than what I just said. For our purposes, what I like about a revolved high lunge versus a revolved extended angle is the hips are set up appropriately and you can play with the low lunge to the high lunge, meaning you can begin to build strength and cultivate balance by rising up off that knee and coming down onto that knee. So I encourage the high lunge position. For the first reason, you don't need to move your feet or set up in a different way. And the second position, it is the natural progression from, our beginner gentle low lunge twist to our more intermediate balance incorporated strength required high lunge twist. The extended angle, while a lot of people refer to it as revolved extended angle, it's really coming from a warrior one alignment with the feet, not an extended angle alignment with the feet. And in addition to that, when you come into that, if you do not have the mobility, the arm that is touching the mat is the same as the back leg because you're twisting towards the bent knee. And because of that, if you have the back heel grounded in a warrior position, the toes are going to be pointed out slightly, the heel is going to be in slightly, a slight external rotation of that of the hip of this back leg. That can put a lot of pressure on the inside of the knee, especially if you keep the foot grounded. And I don't love that unless you're in a class with a qualified instructor. If you feel anything in the back knee, you want to come out of it. And so again, for our purposes, we're going to talk about revolved high lunge instead of revolved extended angle, although you will notice that the poses look very similar. The main discrepancy between the two, other than what I've already talked about, is that the high lunge is on the ball of the foot and requires a little bit more balance. However, you can come from the low lunge to the high lunge and even back down as a way to begin to build strength and play with your balance and the ability to cultivate it. So let's pretend that we're coming from the ground up, and let's pretend that we have had our knee down. It's in a stable position. It is in front of the kneecap on that quadricep attachment, and we have gently tucked our back toes under. Our front leg is exactly where we've left it. The heel under the knee, heel, knee, and hip in direct alignment. Foot is grounded and strong, and our back leg is back behind us. For the twist, we're going to ideally have a block, although you may not need a block if your knee is down. You hopefully will have a block if you are doing a high lunge twist, and you're going to place the block next to the ankle of the front leg. You're going to, again, engage through the lower abdominals, engage through your lower core. You're going to squeeze in to protect the lumbar spine, and then think about where your belly button is. You can even start by keeping your hands or taking your hands to your waist and twist from the belly button up. As you do that, you're going to place that hand onto the block. Once your hand is onto the block, you're going to inhale and open up through the opposite arm. Take it behind you. And from there, you're going to breathe into the twist. And with every inhale, we're going to feel length coming through the spine. We're going to feel the vertebrae open and stretch. And with every exhale, we're going to take our gaze and look a little bit farther behind us. Pay attention to your gaze when you're twisting. As soon as you come up off the floor, your gaze plays a huge part in your balance. And you will notice, especially as you start to practice with one leg off the floor, that the gaze, a focus point or a drishti, is going to be very, very important to you not toppling over and winding up in a ball on your mat. So this is where we start to play with that gaze with our knee grounded. Once you've set yourself up, and if you are going to start to deepen your practice, this is where you're going to want to begin to take the knee off the floor. You're going to have one hand grounded. You're going to have the front foot grounded. They're going to be just about even with each other. You might have the hands slightly farther forward depending on your body mechanics, but they're going to be fairly even. Once you're there, you're going to start to very gently curl those back toes under, press out through the heel of that back foot, engage the quad, and gently begin to lift off the floor, gently, slowly, and see where you are. The other thing that you can do if you have a little bit more of a solid practice, if we're at a little bit more of an intermediate to advanced level, is you can come from a warrior one directly into a high lunge and then into a twist, or you can come from your high lunge into your twist. If that is in your practice, the front foot, again, same. We're not changing anything. The heel is down. The knee is at a 90 degree, hopefully maybe a little bit less if you're already standing. And you have the heel, knee, and hip of that front leg in alignment. If you're coming from a warrior one, let's say you're coming from a chair pose or a Tadasana mountain pose, and you have both feet together, you're going to step one foot back. If you're coming from a warrior one, you're going to have that extended angle foot position or a warrior one foot position where the heel is going to be in slightly, the toes are going to be out slightly. You're going to be lifting up through the arch of that back foot, pressing in through the outside edge of that back foot, and really getting that tree frog suction cup mentality of drawing energy from the earth up through that back leg. A little bit of an external rotation in the back leg, in the hip of the back leg, I should say, and slightly internal rotation. So we're getting that kind of equal and opposite diagonal through the hips themselves. So it's wonderful all around. It's a solid base. From there, if you are coming to a twist, now if we were coming, again, I'm going to avoid it, but I'm going to talk about it just because I want you to know why I'm not advocating for it. If you're coming into a revolved extended angle, this is the position. This is also the same position for revolved triangle, except for one thing where that front leg is straight. We're not even going to talk about that beyond this because this is the setup, but it is a more advanced technique that I want you to be with a qualified professional to start to play with. But this is the same leg and foot setup with the only difference being a straight front leg. It's also very similar, if you'd like to call it, it's a pyramid leg setup, but it then moves into revolved twisting, which means that that block again is going to come down in alignment with the heel or ankle, if you will, of the front leg and in line with the heel or ankle of the back leg so that you're set up again in line with your hips, feet in line with hips, exactly where they are, no twisting or tweaking in that knee, although always be mindful of the inside of the knee due to any inner thigh or hamstring tension, even hip flexor tension coming from the back leg. We always want to protect all of both of your knees, all of your knees. So you want to make sure that if 90 degrees is too much, you're slightly less than 90 degrees, keeping that front knee behind the front heel, or definitely never past the toes, but ideally never in front of the front ankle. With the back leg, you want to make sure that because you have that slight external rotation, you have absolutely no tension on the inside of that back knee. Once you're there, you're going to hinge at your hip creases. You're going to draw the lower abdominals in similarly as you would come into pyramid, long through the spine, long through the heart center, extending out, equal opposite energy coming basically out from your hips and tailbone and out through the crown of your head. So long and lean as you hinge at those hip creases, releasing the same hand as the back leg onto the block. Once you're there, you take a nice deep inhale and you open up, belly button, rib cage, shoulder open, not lumbar spine. And here is where it's very, very important. As soon as you start to twist away from that back leg, you are going to feel that stretch, that tension come through the body. And that is when that back knee can start to get, we're going to say, a little bit grumpy. Because of that, I encourage you as you move through any practice to come to a high lunge position for two reasons. One, it's a little bit harder. It's going to make a little bit more strength and it's going to cultivate more balance. Why? Because your heel's off the ground. Why is this positive? Because your knee is essentially protected. You will have a straight ball of the foot, knee, and hip alignment, which means that there's no foot rotation or hip rotation pulling in the knee in any negative, I don't even want to say negative, but in any way that is not in direct body mechanical alignment. So because of that, once your heel is off the ground, you are going to be off balance. It's going to be significantly harder. So what I encourage people to do is, instead of everything that I just said, when you come into a high lunge twist, you're going to set yourself up by starting from your mountain pose, starting from your chair pose if you want a little bit more in the leg and quad department, a little extra oomph, a little more strengthening. And you're going to shift the weight entirely onto that front leg. You're not going to have a full 90-degree bend. You're going to have a slightly less than 90-degree bend in that front knee, and you're going to want to be sitting back into your chair, having that weight a little bit behind you so that your knee stays in line with that ankle and does not start to track forward. Once you have the weight, I like to encourage coming up onto the ball of the foot at that point. You're going to have most of the weight on that front leg. And then you're just going to step the toes behind you. It doesn't need to be a full extension. It just needs to be to a point where you're not going to have kind of your hips up in the air and then your shoulder down. It can look ugly if it's not done properly. And this is going to cultivate the balance aspect. You're going to have to start getting comfortable with getting that leg behind you and holding it on the ball of the foot. Now, you don't want to throw your leg back, slam on the ball of your foot, and break a big toe. That's not ideal. So you want to start to tiptoe back, touch the floor, play with the balance, and keep your weight in that front leg as much as possible. Once you've gotten your leg behind you, you're on the ball of the foot, you press out through the heel so you really feel as though the heel's reaching and that whole leg is strong, active, and engaged. Lifting up on the quadricep, engaging through the front of that leg. Very, very strong through the heel, through the hamstring, through the glute. But again, a little bit of internal rotation. So you don't want to over engage the glute or it'll start to want to roll out on you. I know I'm saying a lot of things, but the bottom line is you need to have the strength through the legs to support you, to give you the balance so that you can begin to hinge safely from your hip creases forward and reach that hand towards the block, which is still right next to the front ankle and in line with the back toes. Once you're there, now you have 3 points of contact. Now you may feel slightly less off balance, and you can begin to take that arm down and then inhale the opposite arm as you lift your gaze. And here is where we're going to start to go back to the gaze and talk about how important it is. Keep your gaze down first. If you have any sort of balance issues, look forward, not too far forward that you're cranking your neck, but look towards the front of your mat in front of the block. Find a point and come to the twist first. If you're comfortable there, you feel balanced, you feel secure, then you can start, much like a dancer spots, you can start to take your gaze and your neck in the direction of that arm, hand, and shoulder. And the reason for that is because we want you to do so safely. When you're ready to exit the pose, you're going to do the same thing in reverse. You're going to bring that hand back down. You can touch the floor if it helps you on the outside of that bent leg. And then you're going to release the head and neck looking forward. You can step the back foot. You can keep your hand on the block if you need to. Step the back foot up, and I encourage coming into a nice forward fold. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but forward folds are great to do after a twist. It's just very, very helpful. It feels very restorative. And it also, as we talk about the detoxification aspects of the twist, that compression between the legs and the torso, the body and the thighs, gives you that extra kind of wringing out or extra compression of the organs, of the lymphatic fluid, of everything to start to really, you wrung it all out, and now you're pushing it together and moving it to flow out of your body and into the necessary places for you to complete that detoxification process. The final and most challenging twist that I'm going to talk about, which is a little bit harder than the extended angle and or revolved triangle options for twisting, which I said I'm not going to get into. I hesitate to talk about this one, but I'm going to throw it out there because it's the same setup that we just discussed. So I'm not going to repeat that setup. What I am going to talk about is probably one of my most challenging postures. And if you have any weakness in your lower back, any weakness in and around your hips, if you have any injuries, you may want to avoid this one. This is not intermediate, this is advanced. And we are talking, of course, about the end all be all of revolved positions, revolved half moon. And the reason that this pose is just such a challenge is because you really have to have strength in your hips, in your hamstrings, in your glutes for it to look at all the way it's supposed to look. But it's also a very, very challenging balance pose. And the reason that I want to talk about it is because if you want to talk about, you're literally wringing your body out and you're building strength at the same time. And the entrance and exit for this pose is almost exactly the way it is for the high lunge, with one slight difference. The block is going to be in front of the foot because you're going to have to float up and lift the back leg off. So from 3 points of contact, you are going to come down to 2. I do not encourage you to practice this on your own without a qualified professional present. Disclaimer alert. I do not encourage you to practice this alone without a qualified professional. However, I do encourage you to Google what it looks like to practice standing leg split, which is a great prep for it, and to start to build the strength. But the bottom line is why this pose is so challenging is that extended back leg is going to come up off the ground, and you are going to be on opposite foot and hand on a block. And it's hard. It doesn't sound hard. It's very, very hard, especially when you add the twist. And that is where that drishti, that gaze, much like regular half moon, which I'm not going to get into, but at some point it's one of my favorite postures, which is ironic because its revolved version is one of my least favorite, but those are the poses we need the most, right? The ones that we run away from. So to that end, the gaze is very important. And I find that in half moon, even if I start to take my gaze up with my arm, you get significantly more wobbly. That is the technical term. Again, air quotes for those that are listening. So I just want you to be mindful of that. When we come into a revolved high moon, sorry, half moon, not high moon, a revolved half moon, you're going to want to start with your gaze forward, not taking your neck. Generally, with a twist, as soon as the shoulder moves, we move the neck, we move the gaze with the shoulder, right? That's that natural progression up through the cervical spine, from the thoracic up through the cervical. However, this time we're not going to want to do that because you will notice that you will be probably exceptionally wobbly and you have to have a core of steel. And remember, I always say, your legs are part of your core. Your back is part of your core. Your core is not just your stomach and your abdominals. Your core is everything that wraps around from essentially the middle of the back down to the middle of the thighs. Because the engagement of your thighs together, even if they're not next to each other, is part of your core. It's part of the engagement of your lower abdominals, of your pelvic floor. It starts with your inner thighs, and those muscle groups support the hips, support the pelvic floor, support the abdominals, support the back. And so you have to start to think of your core, if you think of your plank, it starts in your legs as much as it starts in your shoulders. So you really need to start thinking of your legs as part of that core engagement because it kind of starts from the ground up. So keeping that in mind, if you decide to come from the high lunge, then you would have set yourself up in the same way. Front leg is bent, relative 90 degree, maybe slightly less. In half moon or revolved half moon, it will come to almost completely straight, if not completely straight. And your back leg is going to, again, be on the ball of the foot. So you are in a high lunge position. You're going to hinge at those hip creases. You're going to reach the inner thighs. And again, because we are in internal rotation, both inner thighs are going to be rolling back behind you the same that they would be in a chair position. So have that mentality in your mind's eye of inner thighs rolling back and the femur heads or the top of the thigh bone in the hip socket coming kind of forward so that those inner thighs can roll back. And that's going to give length to it's going to open the pelvis in such a way that the spine is able to drop into the pelvic bowl a little bit more and release the lower back. Once you have that kind of lack of compression in your lower back, then you can begin to hinge at those hip creases, feel that engagement of the thighs, draw the lower abdominals in, start to bring your torso forward towards the mat. At that point, you're going to take the hand down. And again, the only difference here is the block, instead of being right next to or slightly in front of that foot, is basically, in theory, if the foot is towards the front of the mat, the block's going to come off the mat, just in front of the mat. And basically, you want it to stack directly from the fingertips through the wrist, through the elbow, through the shoulder in a, again, word I hate, but straight line. And the reason for that is because for your own sake, you don't want to be reaching forward. You don't want it, your balance will be atrocious if it's too far back. It needs to set up. Another thing that you can do is you can just have the block in your hand, and as you hinge forward, it's just going to touch down where it needs to be. And I think that's a much gentler and easier kind of way to come into it. However, if you do it that way, you have to kind of hinge on one leg, which takes the balance aspect and really drives it into high gear, because as you come down, like a sipping bird or a seesaw, that back leg is going to come up until your torso, your hips, and your back leg are, again, in my least favorite way to describe, a straight line, or as close as you can get to one, with just the front foot down, and then the same hand as the extended leg is now down in front of a torso's width, right in alignment with your shoulder, in front of that leg. Once you're there, this is your standing leg split. The only thing that you would have is a block for the other hand. And this is why standing leg split, both blocks under the hands, long spine, legs straight, and playing with touchdown, come up, touchdown, come up. That is the prep pose to create strength and balance. Once you're there, and you can even start with 2 blocks and take your hands down. Once you're there, the hand of the standing leg, the leg that is in contact with the ground, rolls open and up and behind. The gaze is going to stay towards the floor or slightly in front of those blocks, because as soon as you start to move your head, you will notice how quickly your balance tries to quit you. And so this is how you enter the pose. As you exit the pose, you will notice this pose will fatigue your back hip. It will fatigue the outside of the hip of the standing leg. It's going to fatigue the glute. It's going to fatigue the hamstrings. It's going to fatigue that shoulder. It's a very, I know it doesn't sound it, but it is a very, very challenging asana. And so I hesitated as to whether or not to even bring it up. But in my mind, it is the apex or the pinnacle of a twist in a traditional yoga practice. Now, sure, can we go into, some crazy inversions and, even more, you know, visually beautiful twists? Sure, we can. But in a traditional, for the majority of people who practice yoga, this posture is highly challenging, highly strengthening, and highly, again, to repeat myself, challenging for the balance aspect, the strengthening aspect, the balancing aspect, and the mental focus aspect to set yourself up properly to enter and exit the pose. So once you have it and you're positioned as such, you're going to take the arm down. The gaze is probably still going to be towards the floor. You're going to take it back onto that block. You're going to place that back foot down, and you're going to gently rise from those hips back up into your high lunge position. From there, shifting the weight onto the front foot and stepping that back leg up to meet, coming into a forward fold. One more time, belly to the thighs. So as we've talked about all different ways to twist from the ground up, literally, let's just go right back to why we're doing this and why this is important. Twisting is one of the only ways, and I don't like to pigeonhole things, but one of the only ways or the best way, maybe I should say, to open up the thoracic and breathe into the rib cage. It's the best way to get the mobility prior to back bending, prior to, it's one of the best ways to warm up a nice gentle, I mean, you can do a gentle seated spinal twist with your legs crossed, right? Sitting in easy pose, legs crossed, one hand to the opposite knee, come to center, one hand to the opposite knee. How many yoga instructors, myself included, do that just to start a yoga class, right? There's so many different ways to twist, but a gentle twist is paramount to a warm up for a yoga class, and generally how many yoga teachers end their yoga class, because you want to feel how much space you've created, and it's so hard to create space in your thoracic vertebrae because of the cluster of organs, because of the rib cage, keeping those organs safe. And to that end, I took a lot about the asanas, and I want to make sure that I'm touching on the pranayama and the breath here because it's paramount always. And what I want to say about it is, first of all, at life in yoga, if your breath catches, if it is challenging to breathe, you are at your max and you need to back out, back away, reduce the angle, whatever you need to do to come to a place of ease. You want sensation, but you want ease. Yoga is not about forcing strength. It's not about forcing balance or forcing flexibility. If you force balance, you fall. If you force strength, you hurt yourself. And if you force flexibility, you wind up pulling a muscle. Overstretching can snap a hamstring. These are not things that you want. Force is out of the equation. You want ease. Yoga is about ease. It's about building strength. It's about cultivating flexibility. It's about finding your lines, finding your boundaries, finding those places that you can push to comfortably. And then knowing very specifically where that nope is. And the nope is your breath or a pain sensation. We hope the breath catching is prior to any pain sensation, that struggle to breathe, that catching of the breath is hopefully your first warning. Pain, you don't want to feel at all, other than, a gentle shaking, if your muscles are really working really hard, or, fatigue of the muscle. And even then, if you get too fatigued, you want to back out of the pose. Yoga is gentle. Even the most challenging yoga is meant to be for you, not against you. So keep that in mind and make sure that as you breathe, you have ease in your breath. The next reason why twisting and breath is so important is because these are the poses where you are manipulating your rib cage, your thoracic vertebrae, and the breath can be super tense in a deep twist. Why is that? Well, you're kind of, I don't want to say collapsing, but you're crunching around in one side, right? And a lot of people, you'll see this. And again, for those of you who are listening, not watching, they force the twist and they kind of reach the elbow around when maybe they should be hugging. They try to tuck the elbow around that opposite knee, for example. They collapse through the entire rib cage. They overstretch the muscles on the inside of that shoulder blade, and they are not breathing because they've basically crunched the lung of the side they're twisting towards. They're only breathing towards the side on the lung that they're opening. But we don't want that. We want the whole rib cage open and we want the twist to wrap all the way around. But as soon as you start to wrap past the center line, you'll notice that you'll get a little bit of a stop in through the direction, the opposite rib cage or lung that you're twisting towards. That's natural body mechanics, but you want to pay attention to that and you want to breathe into it. So, one of my favorite things to do to kind of come full circle and bring it back to our reclined spinal twist is an intercostal muscle stretch. And the only way to stretch these muscles, because they are the muscles in between your individual ribs, is with your breath, is by using your breath and expanding your lungs to open and create space. And you'll feel it because it will feel very, very tight when you try to do this. And as always, I encourage you to practice gently and safely and try this. And you certainly don't need to hold your breath any longer than you can or want to or feel inclined to. So, spoiler alert, listen to your body. Don't listen to just me. Pay attention to yourself. But this is one of my favorite ways to do this. Not going to repeat myself. You've set yourself up. Rewind to the beginning and go back to your reclined spinal twist setup. But you've set yourself up in your reclined spinal twist and you are opening maybe your shoulders prop. Maybe you have the spinal flexibility to be almost both shoulders to the mat on your one hip, right? Hips are stacked, knees are stacked. And you're going to take the hand of the rib cage that is rolled open. So not the hand of the direction that the legs are, but the hand, the way you're twisting toward, the hand that you're looking, the shoulder that you're looking over. You're going to take that hand onto your ribs, anywhere that's comfortable. Generally, it's just under the bra line, but anywhere that you're comfortable. And you're going to take a deep, deep inhale and you're going to breathe into your hand. And if it's comfortable and accessible for you to do so, you're going to gently hold the breath and feel the lung expand. Hold the in breath. So you have all that air in your lung and you hold it. And that hold is going to open up and stretch into those intercostal muscles. And as you exhale, you don't have to hold it for 10 seconds. You can hold it for a count of 3. Heck, you can hold it for a count of 1. Whatever you can to feel the opening, feel sensation. It should feel good. If it doesn't feel good, what did I just say? Don't do it. That's fine. It's yoga, right? So take that deep breath in, hold it, breathe into your hand, feel the opening of those ribs, and then exhale. And then just deepen and relax into that twist. And I hope that it brings you to your bliss, because once it may feel a little bit, you may have a lot of sensations when you first do it, but hopefully it cultivates ease. And that's what we want to do. We want to cultivate ease. We want to detoxify our body. We want to create movement through the organs, through the fascia, through the muscles around the organs. We want to move that lymphatic fluid. We want to get everything that doesn't serve us out of our bodies so that we are living optimally, feeling our best, and creating space in our body to bring in new healthy nutrients, new healthy air, new healthy cells, and releasing and purging all that is stagnant, stuck, and not serving us. And so, as with any spring cleaning, we're going to start within and work our way outwards. And I want to thank you so much for taking this time. I appreciate each and every one of you for sharing your space with me. And so please feel free to share the same with your loved ones. For more goodness, follow me on all the socials at Above the Ground Podcast, or visit my website, airsaboveyoga.com. And as always, please check out my other episodes, and especially the ones that have we've referenced here, specifically the episode for Heart Opening, which touches on our Lord of the Fishes twist. And don't forget to listen to my amazing sisters at divasthatcare.com. You could find us on SoundCloud, Spotify, Odyssey, Apple, or anywhere else that you feel guided. Again, my name is Gia-Raquel Rose, owner of Airs Above Yoga, and you are listening to Above the Ground podcast, where every day is a good one.